Yeah, I do not have.
У нас ще завтра програма. Happy birthday.
We're still figuring out how to use this new space, so I'm realizing that that door should probably be closed and that one open as we get the event underway. Welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to have everybody here in person. A real joy to see some familiar faces in the crowd. My name is Dan Baer. I'm Senior Vice President for Policy Research here at Carnegie. And on behalf of many of my colleagues, it's a pleasure to welcome you all, and we're really excited about today's event. I just wanted to, before we jump in, take a step back. Carnegie obviously has peace in its name. It is our mandate, and of course, if you are focused on peace, that means that you must also, paradoxically, pay close attention to war. And I think for many of us, obviously not only at Carnegie, but more broadly, the events of the last 8.5 months have been heartbreaking and shocking, and have been a reminder of the broader difficulties of the world that we live in right now. And trying to make sense of a senseless war that is taking place across an ocean is an important exercise in trying to make sense of how we will move on after that. I mean, it is important for our vision for how we will move on after that war, which we hope is the after comes soon. Carnegie has been invested in the region, the wider region, Ukraine and surrounding, for the better part of 3 decades, and will continue to stay invested. And I think, you know, one of the things that, one of the lessons that I take from the last 8 months is just how, in a moment where so much feels unsettled in the world, the stories of magnificent human feats become almost a kind of sacred text that you have to return to remind yourself why it all matters and what the way forward will be. And Ukraine has mobilized as a society to fight a war and to try to push back an aggressor. And it will also have to mobilize as a society, an entire society, to win a peace. And there are perhaps no one as appropriate and inspiring a story to share with us today as our guest today about how we will also win the peace. And so we really look forward to the conversation. Before we jump in, I want to just acknowledge, not only do we have Ambassador Yovanovitch here, who's I'm sure known to all of you, we also have Ambassador Payet, 2 former US ambassadors to Ukraine, and well known to our guests as well. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for traveling. I went to Kyiv. By the way, I'm not wearing a tie, which is partly because I came here after an overnight trip to New York and didn't have a tie that matched a purple shirt. But I'm going to say that instead I wrote a piece earlier this summer about how nobody is wearing ties in Kyiv these days. I was in Kyiv in June, and even in my government meetings, nobody is wearing ties. And as the whole society mobilizes to push back. We're really glad you're here. Thank you for making the trip. It's obviously not an easy trip to make. Every trip requires a lot of logistics, and we're glad that you're investing the time here and sharing with the audience today. And Masha, over to you.
Right. And so none of us is wearing ties either, so we're appropriately dressed.
So I'm sure all of you have been following these four amazing women and Hannah Hopko as well on social media, and you are just taking Washington by storm. So we are so glad that we're able to host you here at Carnegie, and that you are going to be able to share your important messages with this audience, not only here in the room, but also the 300 plus who have signed up to join us online. And I think we have a lot to learn from you about the situation in Ukraine, what's coming next, and how the U.S. can help, because we all want to help, and we want our government to help as well. So I want to quickly introduce each of our participants. So Olena is the founder and director of the New Europe Center, a Kiev-based foreign policy and national security think tank. Katarina Shinkaruk is a senior lecturer at Kiev Mahila Academy in Kiev and the Bush School of Government here in Washington, right? And then it's a particular pleasure for me to introduce Yulia Payevska, known by her call sign Taira. She is a celebrated military medic who chronicled her experiences and the experiences of the Ukrainian people in Mariupol using a body camera. She was then held captive by Russian forces for 3 months earlier this year, and we thank you for your bravery and your service. And then finally, Olena Halushka is a board member of ANTAC, the Anti-Corruption Action Center, which I'm sure is familiar to everybody in this audience, and the co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. And I love the sound of that name, because that's what this is all about. So I want to jump right into it, because we don't have a lot of time. Olena, if I could turn to you first. You are here advocating on behalf of Ukraine. What's your core message?
Our core message actually is today we think, and we are strongly convinced, it's the right moment not just to stand with Ukraine, but today is the right time to win with Ukraine. And that is our main appeal. And actually we brought a list of Ukraine's needs, because we think that now is a perfect momentum with a counteroffensive, quite successful counteroffensive, to make a real breakthrough on the battlefield. And we unfortunately cannot afford any interruptions in our counteroffensive operation. But for this, we also need an uninterrupted flow of weapons, including the US weapons, but also European weapons and some other weapons which we need, including like ammunition, air defense system, because we still don't have any Western type of air defense system, more HIMARS. You perfectly know that HIMARS actually was a sort of game changer on the battlefield, and now we need more. So we have to push Russians back until the winter comes as much as we can. And of course, you know, for me personally, it's not very comfortable to come to Washington or to some European capitals and ask for weapons again and again. And I'm not even a military expert. But, you know, we are waging an existential war. Yes. It's life or death war for Ukraine. And the scale of this war is unprecedented as well, because we are waging war on the front line, which is like 1,500 miles. It's about distance like between maybe Boston and Dallas in Texas, you know, just to imagine the scale of the fighting and the scale of the support we need now.
Yeah. So Taira, if I could turn to you, I wanted to ask you, so we've all been galvanized, I think, by the advances in the east of Ukraine and in the Kharkiv region over the last week or so. Is this a turning point, do you think, in the war? And what do you think Russia's reaction will be? I mean, we're already seeing some reactions from Russia, but over the longer term.
Чи це поворотний момент?
Да, я зрозуміла. Вибачаю, що я не розмовляю англійською, поки що я розумію. Я навчаюсь.
I will be, it is my honor to translate Taira. I'm very sorry, I'm not a professional interpreter, so do not judge me too strict. But Taira is understanding English well, but she is still practicing to speak it.
Я не сьогодні, за пару днів буде ровно 3 місяці, як мене поміняли, як я вийшла з російського полону.
In a few days, there will be 3 months as I was swapped and I left Russian captivity.
І це був жахливий досвід, котрого я нікому не побажаю, але відмовлятись від нього я теж не хочу.
It was an absolutely horrible experience which I would never wish to anybody, but I'm also accepting it.
Я не хочу від нього відмовлятись
I
через те,
won't
що я
refuse it.
вважаю це надзвичайно дорогоцінним, дізнатись, на що ти здатний.
I won't refuse it because I think that it is very precious and valuable to basically understand what you are capable of.
Так само і наша армія, і наш народ. Це жахливо, це надзвичайно важко. Ми несемо втрати кожного дня. Я не жартую, кожного Божого дня гинуть мої побратими, мої люди, яких я знаю особисто.
Same with our army. We are having huge losses every day, literally every day. We are losing the best people. My comrades, friends are dying.
Люди, яких я знаю особисто.
People whom I know personally.
А також є мої друзі, мої побратими і посестри, які є досі у в'язниці.
There are also my friends, my comrades who are still in captivity.
Але ми змінюємось, звичайно, завдяки цьому досвіду.
But this experience also changes us.
Якщо ти вмієш проаналізувати, ти виносиш ідею, що насправді ти набагато сильніший, ніж тобі здавалося.
So if you can analyze, you will basically understand the idea that in reality you are much more stronger than you would have thought.
Так, із цією війною. Так, я думаю, що це переломний момент.
Same is actually with this war. Yes, I do think that this is a turning point.
Чесно кажучи, ми самі не очікували такого блискучого результату. Тобто всі думали, що це буде круто, але це просто фантастика.
So to be frank, even we did not expect such a brilliant result. So we knew that it's gonna be cool, but that cool.
Тобто ми набагато сильніші, аніж нам здавалося.
Meaning that we are much stronger than we would have thought.
Звичайно, завдяки допомозі наших партнерів, завдяки допомозі Сполучених Штатів.
Of course, that's thanks to the the assistance from our international partners and in particular the United States.
І підтримки як зброєю, так і моральної підтримки, і фінансової.
This regards obviously military assistance, moral support, financial assistance.
Тому що без цього ми б закінчились набагато раніше, ніж почалась ця операція.
Because without it we would fall and earlier than this counteroffensive has started.
Тож очікуємо подальших дій Збройних сил.
We are expecting for more actions from the armed forces.
Тому що добра воля мусить бути підтримана зброєю. На жаль, без зброї і без сили ми нічого не доб'ємось, тому що росіяни сприймають тільки силу.
But the goodwill has to be supported and backed by weapons, by arms, because we understand that Russians do not understand anything except from the strength and power.
Так, я думаю, це переломний момент, бо психологічно вони вже зламані.
I do think that this is the turning point because psychologically they are already crushed.
Своєю брехнею в своїх СМІ вони намагаються якось це обілити, назвати інакше, але це вже перемога. лишилось тільки закінчити цю війну перемогою.
In their propaganda media, they do try to pack it and name it, some other ways. But this is the turning point, and we need to push to win.
Це все, що я думаю з цього приводу. І знов таки дякую за допомогу, за підтримку і за щирість, яку я бачу тут у ваших очах.
Yeah, so that's what I think about it. And I would also like to thank once again for your sincerity, assistance, support, and for what I see in your eyes.
Well, we want to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the translation.
Дякую за переклад. Це вона, я нічого. Це просто гарний переклад, а я що? Я нічого.
So, Katerina, turning to you, I think everybody in this room is convinced, and certainly the Ukrainian people are convinced that this is going to end with a Ukrainian victory. But what does that look like in practice? I mean, what are the elements of a Ukrainian victory? What can we expect? What are you all going to do to make that happen? Not only militarily, but really primarily diplomatically. And how is there a role for the international community?
Thank you for this question. So Ukrainian victory is an evolving concept with the successes of Ukraine on the battlefield. And just over the past weekend, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, has defined Ukrainian victory as not just retaking Ukraine's territory within its borders of 1991, but also to ensure justice for the victims and reparations from the aggressor. Mm-hmm. And on this note, I should add that this is what a sustainable peace could look like. A just peace is only a sustainable peace. Whereas anything like just absence of the hostilities would not ensure this sustainable peace. So this is where Ukraine is aiming now, and obviously this is where we all need to work together to aim. Just like Olena said, win together. Mm-hmm. And I think what is important for the international community is to, including in Washington, D.C., is to start actually socialize this idea of how Ukraine's victory will be implemented. Mm-hmm. And what it would look like in terms of Russians, reparations, bringing perpetrators and war criminals to justice in more practical terms. Mm-hmm. This is what I think is an important thinking ahead for victory and preparing foundations for that once it happens. Yeah.
So the question of accountability, which is, I think, so important, since if there's a lack of accountability, it's basically an invitation for any dictator to do the same again. Do you have, I appreciate your comment about we in Washington needing to socialize this idea, but do you have thoughts at this point about what that might look like? I'm hearing that maybe there might be, maybe some in the Ukrainian government are thinking about advocating for a special commission, particularly for accountability in this war of Russia's choice.
Well, Ukraine is working hard on gathering all the evidence, including by the efforts of all human rights activists and experts. Ukraine is working with the international institutions like International Criminal Court of Justice, and so I think this is where Ukraine will need international support, also at the UN level, but basically at the level of J7, as we understand it as well. Mm-hmm. Also, obviously, there is a question of accepting this scenario of Ukraine's victory in political terms, which may sound like more acceptable in this audience, but still problematic in some other audiences, which also have an important say in this process.
Yeah, a little bit earlier we heard somebody say that there are some who want Ukraine to be victorious, want Ukraine to win, but don't want Russia to lose. And so how exactly does one square that circle? Yeah, that's kind of a tricky thing.
And here I would just add one more point about behavioral change, which as we see, and I would echo Taira here, behavioral change for Russia unfortunately is not something possible only like through any other means except imposed on battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a question of dealing with this illusion in those audiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we've seen over the years and over the centuries that Russia is a bully and only understands force. So I'm going to turn to you, Olena, and ask, what does, so this is kind of a continuation of what does victory look like, but looking ahead to 2030, what does Ukraine look like? What kind of Ukraine are you going to be building after the war? Because, there's that old saying that it's harder to build a peace than to wage war, as difficult as waging war is.
That's a very good question indeed, because, in order not to give up, but continue working towards our victory every day, we need to be inspired by something, we need to be encouraged by something. And these dreams about which Ukraine we will finally build, this is something which drives us on a daily basis. And yes, that's the kind of, a bittersweet effect of this war is that we can finally cut all the Soviet legacy drastically and build an absolutely brand new Ukraine. That's something which Taira said at one of the interviews, I guess, which I liked very much, so I will repeat it, that ironically, but with the extermination of Mariupol, Russians basically destroyed the Soviet legacy in this town.
Mm-hmm.
And not only physical legacy, like in the architecture or something like that, but in the minds of Ukrainian people. So it is very important that we are using this chance to finally build a new Ukraine as from the physical perspective, like the new infrastructure, green energy projects, that we are thinking about how to attract investments in new technologies, but that we also finally complete our democracy building processes, that we finally manage to establish the real rule of law, which we are, by the way, right now, as somebody who has been part of some 5 failed attempts to push for the Ukrainian judicial reform, I have to say that today's attempt to reform judiciary is a very perspective. And that was something which Putin said explicitly in his speech 2 days before the large-scale war. He named all our anti-corruption institutions, he named our judicial reform, meaning that he was considering this as the threat. So we have to finalize, we have to finish all these things, they need to be working. I also see Ukraine as the part of the European Union by that time. I'm also convinced that we will be part of NATO, despite we are hearing, from some people that this is not on the table. But our armed forces are gaining an excellent combat experience. A very few NATO armies do possess such a combat experience. So we need to catch up politically. We need to catch up on this democratic side. But with regards to the military side, I'm sure that our army would have a lot of things to train our future allies in NATO. So that's a challenge. But if we make the right conclusions, like, for example, also finalizing the de-oligarchization reform, but real de-oligarchization reform with the anti-monopoly reform, judicial reform, media reforms, if we make sure that oligarchs disappear, businesses will flourish and much more foreign investments will also come in as the part of the recovery process. So I truly believe that by 2013, Ukraine will be a very prosperous, real democratic countries, and also a role model and inspiration for other transitional democracies. Because right now, very many new tools and innovative approaches are being tested in Ukraine. So once we are done with testing, we will be happy to share this with others as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's just downright inspiring. I think we all have to agree. So thank you for that. And I'm going to just follow up with you a little bit, Olena, about the reconstruction of Ukraine, which is going to see billions of dollars flowing to Ukraine, hopefully from Russia, but certainly from other countries as well as Ukraine's own funds. And how does Ukraine ensure that those funds go to their intended purpose? And, is this something that we should be talking about now? I mean, obviously that's a sensitive issue, and, all of us understand that the most important thing is winning this war. On the other hand, winning the peace is also critical. And that's what the Ukrainian people want as well, to rebuild a new Ukraine, not what they had before. So I guess I'm looking for your advice for those of you who are with the US government or perhaps other governments or just friends of Ukraine. Are these issues that we should be raising now, raising later? Over to you.
Absolutely. Every time when we are asked about the recovery plan, my first part of the answer is help us win on the battlefield, because if we do not stop Russian aggression, I mean, every day the losses are only increasing, and this does not only regard the front line. The front line is actually everywhere, because Russian missile can be fired at any place across entire country. So we need to defeat Russia fully, absolutely, and have enough air and missile defense to be able to protect our peaceful towns from there. But also, obviously, we have to think in advance about the recovery plans, and we are also thinking about that. And our stance is following. Again, as I said in the previous answer, I'm very optimistic with regards to the Ukrainian future, because we as the civil society have just received a very powerful tool for reform advocacy, which is EU candidate status and the EU accession process. If you take a look about what helped us to push for the reforms, these were IMF loans, visa liberalization action plan, and other types of assistances or carrots which were linked to concrete reforms deliverables. So EU accession process, I mean, EU accession is supported by 92% of Ukrainians. I mean, there are only two other things which have higher level of mobilization and support among Ukrainian society. The first is that Ukraine will win this war, and the second is that Putin is a very bad guy. And the third thing is Ukrainian support towards the European Union. This gives us a super powerful leverage to advocate and make sure that these reforms are done. But this is years. We have to be aware that the SBU reform, for example, to make sure that it is deprived security service of Ukraine, which is counterintelligence agency, but which still does law enforcement. It should be deprived of the law enforcement because this is not its natural function. But in order to get everything done properly, this will take years, while the reconstruction should start immediately after the victory. So our stance is that Ukraine would not have the capacities and all the necessary safeguards to proceed these funds through the public administration. So our stance is that these big recovery funds should not go into the state budget, but they should go through the independent funds, independent institutions, which will be controlled by donor organizations, of course, with the participation with the Ukrainian representatives of the government, of the local communities, of the civil society, but the final say should be in the hands of donors. This will make sure that, and this fund should act as the procurement agency. So the most important thing that it should decide who will be the contractors for the biggest infrastructure projects. This is the approach which we applied for the anti-corruption reform, who will be the eventual decision-making authority in selecting the heads of the anti-corruption institutions. This is right now happening for the judicial reform, and this approach should also work for the recovery. And simultaneously, having this recovery through the independent institutions and EU accession process with all the necessary reforms catching up, you know, in the end, we will get what I have described already before.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you for that really detailed response. Did you want to add something?
If I may add, yeah, just one thing, that we also should make sure that this process of reconstruction and the renovation of Ukraine should be merit-based and with a clear, I would say, Euro-Atlantic emphasis. Because choosing between Chinese companies or Turkish companies who are quite interested already in future reconstruction process, and European and American companies, of course, Ukraine should make it clear that European and American companies who've been supporting Ukraine since the war started, financially, in terms of weapons, they would prevail in this process. And this is also very important point. It is not much discussed now in Ukraine, but we know that there are some people, including people in the government circles, that they feel quite comfortable with the view that Chinese companies could come and participate in this process if they offer a good deal, for example. Or we as civil society, as think tankers, we are not comfortable with this idea, so we're pushing now that American and European companies, and those countries who invested the most in potential future Ukrainian victory, should lead this process. And it's not only about money, it's not only about business, it's also about bringing a best European business practice to Ukraine. It's also about leverage on reforms process, on, for example, of installing rule of law in Ukraine, because we know that European or American companies, they would not be interested in coming to Ukraine if there is no rule of law. And but Chinese would be fine, or Turkish companies, for example, they would be probably quite okay with that, but not American, European. So.
And there's also just the question, the bottom line question, really, of the quality of the road that is built or the bridge that is built. So you use the word leverage, Olena. So the issue of conditionality, which can be very controversial. I am a big proponent. I think that it really helped Ukraine along the way when the international community, working with civil society reformers, working with reformers in the Ukrainian government, insisted on conditionality, and there were a lot of strides made forward. In this context, after a war, is that something that you guys favor, or is that not appropriate at this time?
After the victory, of course. Conditionality,
but even now, Olena already mentioned this EU candidate status of Ukraine, and as you know, European Council offered a list of, as we call them, recommendations, but in fact they're like post conditions for Ukraine's EU candidate status and preconditions for opening accession talks with the EU. That's why we are now quite seriously following the implementation of those 7. There are 7 recommendations. And together with some other think tanks, including ANTAC and some sectoral think tanks dealing with economics and some other issues. So we launched a sort of independent monitoring how those 7 recommendations of the European Union are implemented
Mm-hmm.
in order to have this leverage on our government, on Ukrainian government, but also in order to show European countries and some, the most, I would say, reluctant and skeptical EU member states in terms of future Ukraine's membership in the EU, that Ukraine is serious about reforms, even in these very, difficult times. And that's why I think these 7 recommendations could be a good indicators also for the US government in terms of, understanding how the reform process is going on in Ukraine. What are the what is the progress, what are the setbacks, and how to,
Okay. I'm going to switch the topic slightly to talk about security guarantees. We've heard a lot about the need for security guarantees for Ukraine in the future. And Yermak just unveiled the Kyiv Security Compact. I'm wondering, Olena, maybe if you have thoughts about what security guarantees might look like for Ukraine.
I was pretty sure even before Yermak presented his concept together with former General Secretary Rasmussen, and even before the war started, that the best security guarantees for Ukraine as a non-NATO member state is actually a capable Ukrainian armed forces and the resilient society. So we should invest as much as possible in those 2 components. But for the future, I think, and I think that we should start to prepare to it right now. The best security guarantee, of course, is NATO membership. That was somehow sidelined, but in fact, I think that this new window of opportunities for Ukraine to become a NATO member state may open sooner than we expect. That's why we are now talking about a Swedish model when Ukraine can become a NATO member state basically overnight. So it's actually not overnight, but in political term, it's like overnight. But for this, we are quite good now in terms from the point of military interoperability, and but we have to be very good also in terms of political interoperability, and that is the things unfortunately not all decision makers realize in Ukraine. And we are trying, of course, to convey this message that it's not enough to implement or to adopt NATO standards in armed forces, but there should be also this political interoperability. And Sweden and Finland, actually, they became NATO overnight also because they have, the same values, like functioning democracy, rule of law, democratic state institutions. So that's our task now, and we should be ready to become a NATO member state, a state like as this new historical window of opportunity opens for Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, I have a whole bunch more questions, but I'm going to turn to the audience right now. First, the in-person audience. And those of you who are online, you should be preparing your questions too. So does anybody have a question? Please.
First of all, I wanted to say so many people now admire your resilience, and so but I wanted to really work with Masha, Ambassador Ivanovich together, and still so many people like local employees at the embassy, foreign service officers, EFM. I was EFM, and I used to work at the embassy. So we miss you, and we love you, and we deeply respect everything what was done there. And I'm sorry. On behalf of those people,
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, thank you. I actually think this.
and I try to be short, and I know that you are moderating this meeting, but maybe I will ask you as well, and I will address those two questions to Olena and to Madam Ambassador. So now we're talking about, we started to talk like post-war stages, like Marshall Plan, and this meeting in Lugano a couple months ago when civil society brought this recovery plan to Lugano, Switzerland. So we started to think about those long-term plans, recovery plans. But at the same time, unprecedented amount of assistance, different kind of assistance, military, humanitarian assistance, technical assistance, direct budgetary funds allocated and go into Ukraine. So, and you as anti-corruption experts, I wanted to ask this question: if there is a rapid response in Ukraine, what do you think should be rapid anti-corruption measures right now to, like Madam Ambassador said, to be sure that those funds are allocated and there would be utilized and used in a transparent, accountable manner? This is first question. And second, if you can think and give us an example of sectorial, what you would be focused on, what sectors of economy or public sector, where you think those, most vulnerable sectors, where you would pay attention, like most vulnerable from anti-corruption point of view. So first, measures, and where exactly right now?
Thank you. Lynn?
First of all, I would like to say that we absolutely support the stance which was voiced by your former colleagues, and we as Ukrainian civil society really, really admire what you were doing in Ukraine, and we were extremely grateful to you for that, and we continue to be big fans of you, and thanks for that. Answering your question on the anti-corruption, this is the largest scale war since World War II on the European continent. And we have to understand that the response to this war is also unprecedentedly large. So to say that we can make sure that everything is crystal clear, we as the civil society have the eye on everything, well, I would be lying to you if I say this. But over 8 years since Maidan, what we managed to do is build resilient institutions. And that's something which was one of the preconditions why Ukrainian public administration hasn't failed in 3 days, then in 1 week, then in 2 weeks, then in 1 month, and blah, blah, blah. And we are in the middle of the 7th month of the genocidal war, and Ukrainian public institutions are working. Anti-corruption institution, the effect of the anti-corruption institutions activity over the first half of this year is $300 million. So these are these are corruption schemes which were stopped, money seized and returned to budget. A big deal of that was directed specifically to the needs of the armed forces. So anti-corruption is working for the defense resilience. That is why the short answer is that anti-corruption institutions continue to do their monitoring activities, especially given that the specificity of work changed a little bit, because some of the information is right now very reasonably hidden. But we still need to keep this oversight activities. We are advocating for the necessary transparency, but taking into account that we are at the wartime, so we cannot be as transparent as we were before, but we cannot allow the malign forces to be misusing the war for their corrupt deeds. So it's very tricky, to balance all these things and to keep them into account. We have anti-corruption institutions who are doing very good and who are also continue working as they were. We fortunately have very good reform-minded people inside the government. For example, the Ministry of Transport are doing great job. Ministry of Digitalization are rock stars, and they are also implementing many different anti-corruption tools embedded into their activities, which is, for example, for the Ministry of Transport, super important, because transport and infrastructure will be one of the most vulnerable sectors, because that would cover the biggest, basically the most post-war recovery will regard big infrastructure like all Ukrainian projects, or infrastructure within local communities. Within local communities, it will be decentralized, and this big infrastructure, well, obviously also healthcare, educational, but this, you know, like roads, bridges, and stuff like that, these will be the biggest pieces to watch after, and probably we would be focused on monitoring that after the war.
Thank you very much. Anybody else with questions? And if I could ask people to identify themselves and to keep your question short. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Matthew Murray, I teach at Columbia and I do project work in Columbia. And my question to you is, as representatives of civil society, how are you conceiving of the moment when it comes of using the victory and the legitimacy that it will have imparted for your government, for your people, to in effect create a new social contract between the government and people of Ukraine? Because the focus of the recovery and reconstruction will have to be on how it will be citizen-led and structured. And so I'm just curious as to whether you see that there will be this moment and how it can be captured.
Can I ask Katerina? Maybe?
Yes. So thank you for the question. It is my pleasure to say that the Kyiv-Mohyla University, which I am representing here, is a part of this big discussion alongside with the Ukrainian Catholic University. These are like two major intellectual centers that assemble opinion leaders, thinkers, experts, civil society representatives currently in this big conversation about the social contract after Ukraine's victory. And so there's been a number of roundtables, discussions on this. And obviously, the whole idea is to first to see how the society could capitalize on the victory, how to multiply the capital gained in the victory. And also, I should say that there is clearly an increase in social trust currently. And including even like as what I'm hearing from Olena as anti-corruption activist is different what we were hearing from her like a year ago maybe. And this is also a very illustrative of how the trust has been increasing, which is again a very important thing, and to keep it and to build upon it following Ukraine's victory. So to bottom line, the process is ongoing, the discussion is very vibrant, and it is important to keep it going in that direction.
Just a short remark on that. Even now, we are witnessing a decreased level of tolerance toward corrupted people, And I think that even if after the war some of the old problems will reemerge, they will reemerge in totally different contexts, with different implications and with totally different perception from the society, because society and Ukrainians are paying such a huge price, human price, that they would never accept like people who would be just, stealing their money from their pockets, as an example, or something like that. So it's quite obvious that there could be a new social contract, and this social contract would serve for better Ukraine, European Ukraine,
Thank you. Do we have any online questions?
We do. So this is a question that comes from online. From your perspectives, is there any fear that any economic link or dependency on Russia, particularly regarding the transit of natural gas or oil from the EU through Ukraine, could complicate the conflict in the upcoming months?
So a gas question.
I might. Actually, one of the reasons why we campaigned that much against both Nord Streams, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, was that Ukrainian gas transmission system was one of the biggest physical deterrences for this war to start. And if you assess when Putin started this war, it was while he was, while the process of the certification of the Nord Stream, while the construction of the Nord Stream 2 was already finished, and there was the process of the certification, and there was very clear message from German government that this certification will go on despite the outcry of Ukraine. And that is why I would say that it's absolutely vice versa. As long as there is gas transit through Ukrainian gas transmission system, this is the deterrence for Russian destruction of the critical infrastructure, because right now they are specifically targeting gas transmission system, but not this main which brings gas to Europe, but these smaller ones which are bringing gas to Ukrainian households and to Ukrainian towns, because they do not touch this main pipeline. They are targeting thermal power plants. Take a look what they have done to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I mean, I'm terrified because everybody is so focused on the possible nuclear accident that people do not understand that they have just cut the source of 25% of generation of electricity for Ukraine. How can we survive through winter without 1/4 of Ukrainian electricity generation? So they are using energy as the weapon, and this gas transit is one of the last deterrences which we have to make sure that this critical infrastructure can be protected at least somehow. So we need air and missile defense. We need C-RAMS systems, the one which were used in Iraq and in Afghanistan to defend Kabul airport. We need to put this is tactical air and missile defense. We need to put it about the critical energy infrastructure objects to make sure that they are defended from Russian missiles.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have time for one more online question, a short one and a short answer.
Okay, so this question comes from Daniela Liberatore on YouTube. What will the role of the younger generation, so people in their 20s in Ukraine, be? What do you think will be the main consequence of this war on that generation?
Who wants to take that one? Tyra, you have a 19-year-old. You have a 19-year-old daughter. What's the effect on her?
Я розкажу. Моїй доньці 19 років наразі, і
So my daughter is 19.
І допоки я не потрапила в полон, я не очікувала, що вона настільки моцна і потужна.
And before I was captured, I didn't even know that she is such a brave and resilient.
А вона завжди була дуже класною, дуже щирою людиною для мене. Я її сприймала як доньку, як дитину.
She was always very cool and very nice for me, but I perceived her as the girl, as my child.
Але коли я потрапила в полон, вона одягла обладунки воїна, взяла меч і пішла на війну добивати маму з полону.
But when I was captured, she basically won her gear, took the sword, yes, and went on her battlefield to release Taira.
І я бачу, як зараз з нами, тобто вже такими підстаркуватими бійцями на фронті.
And I see how with us, young in the soul, servicemen on the front line,
в окопах,
who are in the trenches,
б'ються 18-20-літні хлопці, дівчата.
So next to the representatives of our generation, we see 18-20-year-old youngsters in the trenches.
Багато з них ми втратили уже на тепер.
Many of them we have already lost.
І кілька моїх друзів загинули у мене на руках.
And
Саме
if-
цього віку.
And a few of my friends of this age died in my hands.
Я бачила, як вони помирали, і я можу вам сказати, що вони ні про що не жалкували.
I saw them dying, and I can tell you that they were not pardoning.
Regretting.
Що?
Regretting.
And they were not regretting for anything.
Вони були абсолютно щиро горді тим, що вони захищають своїх батьків, братів, сестер, свою батьківщину.
They were absolutely proud that they were defending their parents, their brothers, sisters, and their homeland.
І оці діти надихають мене продовжувати боротьбу.
And these kids are inspiring me to continue fighting.
Я трошки втомилась, якщо чесно.
I'm tired, to be frank.
Трошки.
A little bit.
Але коли я згадую ці картинки, я заплющую очі, я бачу обличчя цих хлопців.
But when I recall these pictures, when I close my eyes, I see the faces of these boys.
Я кажу собі, стара, вставай, давай, треба робити справу.
And I tell myself, get up and go and do your job.
І я роблю.
And I do it.
І
Wow.
саме вони, ті, хто переживуть цю війну, будуть відбудовувати цю країну і відбудовувати цілий світ.
And these very youngsters who will survive this war, they will do the reconstruction of our country and they will rebuild entire world.
Чому цілий світ? Бо цілий світ змінюється, іде третя світова.
Why entire world? Because entire world is changing. It's already the World War III.
І дай Бог, щоб вона закінчилась перемогою в Україні і не пішла далі.
And let it end with the victory on the territory of Ukraine and it not spreading further.
І ваші діти, і діти європейських батьків, щоб не знали цього горя.
And that your kids and the kids of the European parents are not living through this sorrow.
І щоб їх однолітки не брали зброю до рук. Це моя мрія.
And their peers are not taking the weapons, taking up arms. This is my dream.
Thank you. Thank you for those really moving comments, which have brought me to tears. I think Taira is giving us a little window into the challenges in Ukraine, the sorrow that people have, but also the resilience and the future of Ukraine, which is Ukrainian children, Ukrainian teenagers, Ukrainian youth. When I was in Ukraine over the weekend, what I saw was a completely mobilized society. Everybody was doing their part, just as you are doing your part here to advocate for Ukraine and Ukrainian needs. And I have to say, it's just very, very moving. And I think this is why Ukraine will prevail. And so I'm going to quote former Secretary of State Colin Powell, because I think you guys exemplify the spirit of not only resilience, but optimism. And he always used to tell us that optimism is a force multiplier. And I think that's what we see on this stage, that Ukraine will prevail because you believe you will win and you will win. So I hope you'll join me in giving this great team a standing ovation.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and folks online, thank you for dialing in and tuning in. Look forward to doing something like this again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you, sir.
Слава Україні.
Героям
Yeah.
слава!
Thank you.
I was supposed to start.